Welcome to this week's episode of Being Human. Delighted to say I'm here with Reiner Kraft, PhD. Reiner is a Silicon Valley veteran. He was once director of engineering at Yahoo. He also led the search personalization and research team at Zalando, which is a very large e-commerce retailer site. And he is the creator of the High Performance Mind program. Reiner, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, glad I'm here.
Yeah, and I am absolutely delighted to have you here. Your story, your origin story, I suppose, of what you've developed, experienced stress and burnout in that role in Yahoo, as I understand it, I think will be familiar to a lot of our listeners. So I wonder if we could start there in that period where you were experiencing that stress and burnout, and I suppose where a lot of this all started.
Yeah, I mean, I moved to the Silicon Valley in the mid-90s. This was the time when the internet started, and originally from Germany. But yeah, it was an exciting time. And then I started working in high-tech, IBM Research, later to Yahoo. And yeah, live in the tech industry can be quite hectic, quite busy, fast paced, especially there in the Silicon Valley. And at that point, I did not have any training of the mind. I didn't even know what that means, training the mind. And so I was basically focusing on technology. I was focusing on my work. And it was fine. I had a lot of great results, success. So like typical fast-paced career and a lot of fun, to be honest. California has the sunshine, so that's on top of all of it. So quite good. But then over those years, the stressful environment at the end of the day got to me. And I got into this state of, I refer to mental exhaustion, where you could, at that point, you think, oh, maybe I can work harder and get stuff done, but it's the opposite. So you put in more effort and you get less out. And unfortunately, it was not, later on I learned all these terms like burnout and so on. It wasn't even a burnout. But it was probably, if I wouldn't have done anything in terms of changes, it would have led to this. And so at the end, what I learned was that, taking care of the body, of the mind, balancing things out. So this is nothing new, but I didn't really pay attention to it. And that's where I got into a state that was, it was not fun to be in there. And so it took it took a sharp, for me, sharp pivot what I had to do to really figure out, so what can I do? And of course, when you get into this state, it's not that easy because you lack energy, and that makes it hard, right? So. But at the end, looking back, it was glad everything worked out like this, because this was for me then time to focus more on awareness, becoming more present. I got deep into mindfulness, meditation, but then later things evolved, and with more awareness, I was able to gradually tame I call it the monkey mind, right? So it's a untrained state of mind. So the term is nothing I made up. It exists for thousands of years, the monkey mind. But it is really what it was, right? There was this state of monkey mind. Now I can smile and look back. But it took me quite some time to start really taming that monkey mind and get me then in a better state.
I love the way you've described it as the untrained mind. I've not heard that before, but that gives one some hope that it's possible to do something with this monkey mind. It's often referred to as just this thing we sort of have to somehow come to terms with. I like that idea of an untrained mind. Was there like a seminal moment or a particular moment that sticks out in that time when you're working at Yahoo where you had a moment of clarity that suggested you need to have a pivot?
Yeah, there was actually, but it was a little bit more, for me, it felt more a dramatic moment. I was sleeping at night and maybe 2 a.m., 3 a.m. I suddenly woke up and then it felt like I have some heart attack or something, right? You learn about these symptoms when you read some books or so, and then so, oh, what's going on? And then emergency came and they put me on all those equipment and checked things out and took me to the hospital. And the pivotal moment was in the moment I was in the in the ride going to the hospital. All of a sudden, still puzzled about what's going on, but that was the moment when all of a sudden there was this clarity. It came in, it was there, and I could literally look at myself, look at the whole situation, but I was calm, I was relaxed, and there was this clarity. And that was a pivotal moment. I said, oh, wow, what is this? I haven't experienced this type of peace before. It was really peace and everything. And then when I got into the hospital, they did a few more checks. They told me that, oh yeah, it's nothing that serious. It's called an anxiety attack. I said, oh, what is it? And so they gave me some medication to pretty much calm me down. But at that point, I was already calm. And then nevertheless, the next morning I got out and still puzzled what happened here. But I knew at that point I have to do some changes because otherwise, this was a clear sign you have to do some changes.
Isn't that interesting that was considered normal, right? Like that's the society we live in right now, where someone having an anxiety attack is a normal occurrence for people in these hospitals.
Yeah, and I had no clue what this is. And I know people were talking about that before. I was usually smiling, what anxiety attack, what should that be? Right? But if you then have these symptoms and then later someone explains to you, this is what this is, and then all of a sudden, right, and yeah, that wasn't pleasant. And those things were coming then over the next coming months, unpredictable. And so things worsened at the end of the day, because now you had all of a sudden the anxiety was now about when is the next one coming,
right?
And that was a pretty dreadful state. So it wasn't pleasant, and that's when I started. Okay, what can I do? And I learned about mindfulness, MBSR, mindfulness-based stress.
Okay.
That was an entry, right? This is how I got into the first time. I didn't even know what mindfulness, meditation at that point. Of course, people were talking about it here and there, but it was still not that widespread in tech or in that industry. And so that was then something I discovered, 8-week program, and it's kind of structured. You meet once a week. You learn some basic on body awareness, meditation, body scan, basic stuff. But it felt really good. And then I realized, oh, there is more to this. There is something there. Let's explore that. And my background is a scientist, so I had something now to focus on, right? Because I felt it's moving, but I still had no clue what's happening there, right? And how to steer it maybe and make it even better or more efficient, and then how to take some of these learnings into the workplace. I think that was the next motivation, because the workplace at that point was also in many, I remember some of these days, very toxic, to be honest. It's usually when companies are in these different phases. And Yahoo at that point was already more in a downward spiral. There were ups and downs, but most of the time there were downward spirals. And that usually brings out the worst within the employees and the leadership, because there's fear all over the place, right? And that that combined with pressure creates a really toxic environment. So that's why I figured, man, there's some good stuff here around mindfulness. How wouldn't it be great if more of these leaders there would actually use some of these techniques and to have more clarity what they're actually doing, right? And that was for me a motivation since I was a leader there. And okay, I don't have control what they're doing, but I have some limited control of what I'm doing. So I'll see how it goes.
Right. And just so of those techniques that you mentioned, you went on this 8 program. What were the ones that you started to rely on or started to incorporate in your regime?
Yeah, pretty much simple breathing exercises. They were quite powerful. Some meditation, sometimes 10 minutes, 15 minutes. I worked my way up to 20 minutes, and sometimes then even twice a day. It's like meditation in the morning, 1.5 in the evening. And so I experimented, but I still couldn't really get a good handle on, is this now a better routine? Should I do more, less, and so on? So for me, what's lacking was data, right? I couldn't really get a handle on all of that stuff. And that's why I explored. So how can I actually measure how things are moving along? What type of meditation works better for me? And this is where gradually also wearable tech was introduced. Like nowadays, there's this Oura ring here that can track my activity, sleep. And there was even for a meditation, Muse came out with a meditation headband that captures the EEG and can actually tell you how you're meditating. So those things got me excited because I figured, oh, wow, now I can actually put some data there. And that helps with the agile mindset. Since at work, I was doing agile all along, right?
Yeah.
Basically build, measure, and learn. That was a completely natural thing to do. But for mind and body, this wasn't clear, right? How do you measure your, now I refer to this, your level of present awareness, your LPA, which is defined as the time you're fully present over the course of the day. How can you measure that? How can you measure how your mind is doing, right? Different KPIs, so to speak. How can you see how your body is doing, right? What kind of, I mean, you go to a doctor, you get some basic checkup done, they do a little bit of blood work, but is that it? Are these reliable markers to look at in terms of how you're doing? So these questions popped up over the past decade. And then I got into basically figuring out how to glue these pieces all together in this big puzzle. And this has been in the past, I would say 2 or 3 years, this idea of the high performance mindset that you mentioned at the beginning emerged when I figured, well, if my level of awareness is rising, if my mind is getting better, to the mind I usually refer as the software of the mind operating system, if that is running smoother and more effective, and then if my body is getting in better shape, then things are coming together, and then you can really generate or maximize the value that you can produce here. And so that got me excited to use this term high performance mind to bring these 3 elements of awareness, mind, and body together. And then, of course, how can this be accomplished? How do I measure it? What kind of interventions are needed? What kind of lifestyle changes are needed? How do I get to this high performance mindset? But this was a journey, and there's lots of ups and downs, random stuff. Nowadays, obviously, when I created it last year, I created this program, the high performance mind program, which then I did a pilot. But this allowed, because the question was when I worked with many business executives, tech leaders, entrepreneurs, founders, they always ask, how can that be done in, let's say, 3 months? So relatively quickly. And that was for me the motivation. Can I bring all these different things from awareness, mind, and body together in 3 months? and doing it in an agile manner. And this was the result in High Performance Mind program, which is now evolving and, of course, is updated and tweaked, again, also in an agile manner. But last year, when I ran the pilot with a small group, it was clear it works. And so now I got excited and say, oh, cool. So it's reproducible. It's data-driven. It has these data-driven aspects, so people can actually measure, see what's happening, and can verify. And so now I'm basically thinking about ways on how I can reach more even, or how can I scale it even.
Right. Fascinating. So what are the things that you measure, and what do you expect to see change as people go through the program?
I think the core fundamental piece is awareness, and this level of present awareness that I mentioned before, boosting this, cultivating more awareness. And when I started working with leaders, entrepreneurs, usually we start out in the first 2 to 3 weeks to establish a baseline. It's how you do it in a scientific way. Right? You measure, you establish a baseline, but one measurement usually is not sufficient. You have to do many. And so to get some reliable number of what this level of present awareness is. And at the end, the numbers that came out, usually they're quite low. So it's maybe 2%, 3% awareness. This is usually what the LPA people is not high.
And this is wearing a band on the forehead. Is that how that works? Or
no. This is basically, so the LPA is something everyone can now, when I provide a few of these simple instructions, can do it at home. There's no technology needed. It's basically the core is for the measurement is what I call a mindful minute. And a mindful minute is to be fully present, fully connected to the present moment for 1 minute. So if you would take a stopwatch, right, time it, and then you're fully there for 1 minute, which sounds easy, but it's actually not. Try it out. Right? Yeah. But if you're there for 1 minute, then you have accumulated 1 mindful minute. And now if you accumulate these mindful minutes over the course of the day, over your waking time, usually people are, let's say, 16 hours awake, so roughly 1,000 minutes. So then you can basically divide these mindful minutes by these 16 hours, these roughly 1,000 minutes, and that gives you a percentage then. And so as an example, if you're 20 minutes, if you accumulate 20 mindful minutes over the course of a day, that is about 2%, right? So your LPA is about 2%. And usually 2%, 3%, sometimes less, it depends. Of course, there's people that have more. But at the beginning, usually it's that low. And the rest of the day, so what do you do in these 97% of the day? Well, you're basically caught up with your mind, with your thinking, right? There is the voice in your head. There is the monkey mind. There is all these distractions. You think about the past. You basically rehash things. You plan the future, strategize. So this is all happening in your mind, right? And if you would actually stop thinking and start speaking, everything that comes to mind, you would speak, right? You would run around basically talking all the time, right? And this is where you're not present. You're basically identified with thought activity. And it's basically completely unconscious behavior. It's autopilot in its best form, right? And that is the majority of the day. So if it's at the end of the day, if it's 95% or 97%, it doesn't make a big difference. And it's also not about counting here this number as a perfect number, because it will never be perfect. Establishing this number is as you can see, is a manual process. And nowadays, obviously, some tech devices like this Oura Ring, for instance, helps you to calculate mindful minutes. It accumulates. You can basically go there, put in, say, okay, now I do guided meditation. And then you sit there for 5 minutes, and then the smartphone is basically counting these mindful minutes. In Apple and iPhone is actually storing them in Apple Health. And you can look at the end of the day how many mindful minutes you accumulated. And so the assumption there is if you're actually meditating or if you do some breathing exercises, whatever things you're doing, that it is considered mindful minutes, that you're fully present. But there is more opportunities to do this, which is the app is not tracking, and therefore the tracking becomes a little bit more difficult, right? It's manual effort, but it can be done. So people learn how to do it, and then they end up with these low numbers, and then they say, great, this is the state of where you are, right? But now let's look at in these 3 months, can we do 10x, right? This is usually I look for some significant transformation. Can we get it up from 2% of, let's say, 20%? Or if it's at 1%, can we get it up to 10% or more?
Right.
And that this is the type of transformation I'm looking. And then what's happening? I mean, for now, first, when you hear about this is all a numbers game. Oh yeah, 1%, 10%, 20%, whatever. But when you actually reach these levels, there is a significant change in your level of present awareness that has a ripple effect to everything you do, and also a ripple effect to your monkey mind, right? Which allows you then to actually look at it with clarity and start to upgrade it and debug it, so to speak.
Yeah. That makes sense. A question came up in my mind as you described the mindful minute then. So that makes sense if one is meditating or doing breathing exercises. But what if I were deeply engrossed thinking about a problem, let's say? Would that still be classed as being mindful?
No.
Right.
Once you go into a thinking mode, then it's not necessarily connected to the present moment, because now you're actively rehashing stuff and thinking, solving a problem. So not necessarily considered a mindful minute. But if you, for instance, if you brush your teeth in the morning and you actually pay attention, like these 2 minutes, what the dentist tells you, take 2 minutes to brush your teeth. If you're doing this mindfully by really paying attention, little like tooth by tooth, right? Really feeling it, going through it carefully, really being there, then what you realize, there is no thinking. So thinking is coming to an halt, and you just focus on the brush, right? You just go through it, and then you see 2 minutes are not even sufficient. Sometimes you need more if you want to do it properly. But you haven't gone into thought activities, but now you spend 2 minutes being fully present. So this counts as mindful minutes. Or if you're in a meeting, most of us are in meetings over the day. If you're actually paying attention to what the other person is saying, really being present, that also counts as mindful minutes, right?
Okay.
So, or if you take let's have a cup of coffee, right? If you're really present when you drink it, you really sense it. You get the taste. You feel how it evolves in your mouth, right? That is also mindful minute.
Right.
So you can see there's a lot of ordinary things that you do anyway. You're just doing them present, being there. And then the problem, however, is at the beginning, the monkey mind is so strong. Try it out, like do a shower, right? Take a shower. You can do mindful shower. You can actually try. So that's why I'm saying try here in this context. You can go taking a shower with the intention of really being present, being mindful, what's happening when the water comes down, right? Touches the skin, really experiencing this. But then I pretty much promise you, after 20 or 30 seconds, the monkey mind kicks in and starts basically telling you stuff. Oh, you know what? There is this appointment you have later. Have you really thought about everything that you have to do? And then from that thought, there's the next. And then all of a sudden, you have 4 minutes under the shower, but you were all the time in this thinking activity, right? And that's where the monkey mind kicks in. There is too much thought activity, and this is the normal state of most people. Too much thought activity, right? And if you encourage the monkey mind, that means you let it basically just let it go on and go on and go on, it's not getting better, it's getting worse. And then sometimes you can't even shut down the monkey mind. You come home from work in the evening, you're with the family, and you're still in the monkey mind and thinking about work and it continues, and then some people can't even sleep. They have trouble falling into sleep, or they wake up in the middle of the night and again the monkey mind kicks in. Right? So it's too much thought activity, and because the untrained state of mind is continuously, it's like consciousness is jumping onto these thoughts. If it's not trained, it's encouraging more and more of this thought activity. And this is actually another of these KPIs, thoughts per minute. You can also measure
you
that.
manage that, can
Thoughts
you?
per minute. Yeah, you
Oh,
can
wow.
measure
I didn't know that was possible.
There is a simple exercise you can do it. And in the meantime, even there is now technology that I mentioned where you can see what's happening, or even with heart rate variability, you can see if there's thinking activity, let's say in a moment of silence during meditation.
Wow.
Nowadays, you can even see this with tech devices, but what I usually, simple exercises, you can relax, maybe close your eyes, set a timer for 3 minutes, and just be there. And then when you notice the monkey mind, when you become aware of the first thought, right, put a check mark, continue, come back, and then the next thought, and you write it down, right? So you can count these thoughts. It takes a little practice at the beginning. The numbers are not that accurate. But once you get used to the counting of your thoughts, like you count them for 3 minutes, divide them by 3, so then you have thought per minute properly. And if you do this in the morning, at lunch, in the evening, at different times over the day, different days over the week, you get a pretty good handle in terms of what your average thought per minute is. And usually that number is at the beginning is already high, but then it gets higher and higher because during the training, when you become more aware, when you increase your awareness, then you even learn to distinguish these thoughts and recognize them even better. And then the number goes up. And so then people end up just, let's say, 10, 12 thoughts per minute, or even more. Then you can think about this mental activity. I mean, what energy this sucks if you have 10, 15 or so thoughts per minute. It's crazy if you think about it, right? And so the goal would be, if you become more aware that this number of thought activity eventually goes down, and this is really one of the key KPIs is, are you getting these thoughts per minute really down to a halt, pretty much, right?
And so I'm fascinated. So what's your experience of that then? Where did you start and where are you now?
Well, at the beginning, I didn't even know how to measure this properly, right? And I had, and then that's why I said, when I learned how to really become more aware of these thoughts. At the beginning, the problem is there is a thought, you become aware, but in reality, there were already 2 or 3 thoughts because it took you so much time to actually become aware of this thought activity. You were already, the monkey mind was going on. And then all of a sudden, after maybe 20 seconds, and you say, but if your level of present awareness is increasing, so this is this one force, if you cultivate more awareness, then you can better see where a thought starts, where it ends, and then you can count better. So at the beginning, as I said, I mean, 10 years ago, I don't know, this was my worst times. I think 15 or so was easily possible. It depends, like in the morning is usually less activity than in the afternoon or in the evening. It looks like it's usually building up over the course of the day. And then over the weekend usually is also less activity, right? And then at the end, when you train the mind and when you start working on this, you can gradually get it down in realistic steps that make sense, right? At the end, if you can decrease your thought activity from 15 thoughts per minute or from 10 thoughts per minute, let's say 20%, so from 10 to 8, that would be a good accomplishment, right? And gradually you want to get it down, right? The ideal state is basically 0, right? This is where you want to get to. And to this state, I usually also refer to the state of enlightenment. right? In the sense that if awareness is fully there, if there's no thought activity anymore, that means you're completely in a state of flow. And you can use this for different purposes. Let's say you're climbing a rock, right, or a mountain, right? There is no time for thinking. If you're hanging on this wall, grabbing here, if you make one mistake, you're out, right? You're basically you have to be present. You have to be fully present, and this is when you have zero, basically, thought per minute. If you would measure it, there is no thoughts anymore. You're just being present. You're there. And this is when you are in this complete flow state, you can tap into your inner wisdom, intuition. And this is a really cool state from a practical standpoint. When I thought about it first, when I heard the term enlightenment, I usually were referring to these Zen monks in some monastery, right? And meditating for 12 hours and going into these deep meditations. And then they were talking about enlightenment state. But what it really is, this is something that I realized later, it's just being present. So you can be now in this state, right, where you really, thoughts are gone, awareness is there, and you're in a state of flow with whatever you're doing, right? And this is where you want to get to. And the key metrics at the end of the day is the LPA and the thoughts per minute. There are more. There's more of these KPIs, mind KPIs that are developed over the years. They're helpful for some period of time, right? And of course, all this counting stuff is just like something temporary in terms of helping you get to this state. Ultimate state of enlightenment, I would say this is the end state. If you get there, until then, you count. And once you reach a certain level of LPA, a certain level of awareness, then the counting is not needed anymore, right? Then you can pretty much chill. But until then, it works. It's effective. There are certainly other ways of doing it. And of course, you can meditate for 10 hours, but I'm usually a very practical guy because I have to get some work done. That's also something where I feel there has to be some balance, balancing the state of being and the state of doing, right? And if I would be in a state of being all day, right, what can I do then, right?
Well, yeah, that's interesting because that gets philosophical, because we might argue that some of the great spiritual leaders just did focus on that, right? And just created that space around them that allowed for something outside of doing anything.
That's what you're doing, right? That's when you're creating space. When you are fully aware, you create the space for your teams. And then you let them do the things, but you're still doing other stuff, right? You would, for instance, you create these spaces, you hold them, but at the end, you're also doing something. It's not that you're sitting there all day and meditating, right? So maybe you work on some strategy, maybe you work on some new team health process. Whatever it is, there is also work that you're doing, and then you're going into the doing, but you can go into the doing state in a state of flow, in a state of awareness, and using this to basically get you through there in a very easygoing manner instead of creating stress and drama, basically.
Yeah. The point isn't that you stop thinking completely. It's that when you do think, it's more productive.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you're saying? And I was fascinated to see on your site you mentioned IQ and EQ, but is that something you've measured, that an increase in IQ as a result of these processes?
So I would say IQ, usually there's not that much movement in there. It was also, I was curious about that one. And usually IQ can be hacked more on the body side using biohacking based on the science of epigenetics. So this is something I got really deep into in the past 5 years, studying micronutrients, studying the body, the genes, DNA, functional medicine, really going deep. And yeah, you can hack IQ with on the biohacking side with the body, with proper lifestyle changes, with proper micronutrients, nutrition, intermittent fasting, all the good stuff, proper sleep, right? So there's ways you can boost IQ. But on the awareness side, what I was talking about as the really the fundamental piece of the pillar of everything, awareness, you usually see a rise in EQ,
Okay.
big one, right? So all of a sudden, empathy comes up, compassion comes up. For some people, they haven't even felt that before, and they say, "Oh, what is this?" Because now they become aware, right, of those things, and it takes practice. It's all of this takes practice, weeks, months, years, daily practice. Then you get better. And of course, there is a few lucky guys on this earth, right? They wake up in the morning and they're exactly in this enlightened state. Uh, there is people out there, like let's say Eckhart Tolle is a very popular, well-known spiritual teacher, and this is how it happened to him. Basically, woke up the next morning, right, full in the state of being. But this is more the exception. For normal people, evolving, becoming more aware is a process, and there's no right or wrong. And for me, as a scientist, I just figured, well, there has to be a systematic one, and there has to be something that I can get there faster, and that's what basically what was motivating me, figuring out how can it be done, and pretty much applying the same principle that I would apply to a typical software engineering project, right? Which is agile based on data.
Yeah. Well, I do find it fascinating that we can measure the thought. I've not even considered that as a measurement because I meditate twice a day for 20 minutes and I've experienced some of what you've described, right? I'm in my 40s and I saw a post on social media just this morning about like, I'm I wake up 2 times in the night, years old, right? Making this joke that, yeah, he was at an age where most men wake up a couple of times in the night. Since I've been meditating, I just never wake up in the night. I sleep all the way through.
Mhm.
And that's consistent with what you're saying. So I'm training, but I'd never thought about it in these terms. I just thought, I enter a more restful state when I meditate before I go to sleep, and that helps me. I've never really considered that my meditation was training my mind, and that's such that it was having an impact during sleep, quite as precisely as in the terms that you put it, which has really helped me to make sense of it, actually.
Yeah.
But I've never considered measuring any of this stuff. It'd be interesting for me to measure now how many thoughts per minute I have and to speculate what they might have been before I started meditating. I'm like 18 months into regular meditation.
Yeah, you'll see improvements all over the place. I mean, there's so many biomarkers, and I mean, meditation is well researched and studies. There's 10,000 of research papers out there on meditation and all the positive effects. So it's a very clear thing that if you're doing that for, let's say, almost 2 years, you're doing it regularly, this is cool stuff. So there's a lot of impact there generated on the body, but also on the mind. The mind becomes with the training. This is training for the mind because the muscle of the mind, I call these conscious recoveries. Usually when you're in meditation, there is, you go in there, then a thought comes, but the idea is not to suppress these thoughts, but just to become aware of them. You become aware of the thought and then let them flow by, right? It's like a cloud comes by. You can look at them and then they go by, right? And then over time, the mind recognizes that you don't care about these thoughts anymore. This is where the change comes in. So, but every time there's a conscious recovery, there is a thought. Once you get the typical, what consciousness likes to do is there is a thought. This basically you get attached to it. It's like this exciting thing, right? You get attached to it. Now you're identified with this thought. And then you recognize, oh, there was a thought. I didn't, interesting, but yeah, I don't want to still be connected to it. I just want to let it pass. This is a conscious recovery, and this is happening hundreds of times when you do a meditation. And you can see this type of activity when you use a neuro meditation, something like a muse meditation or neurofeedback. you can see that this thought activity based on the brainwave states, you can see how it is, right? Is it more in a calm state, dominantly alpha waves or even theta waves? Or is it going up more in the thinking mind, which is more beta wave activity? And you can see these things. And every time you're going from beta back in alpha, could be considered conscious recoveries. But this is now measuring electrical signals pretty much. But you can do this without the equipment by becoming aware there is a thought and then you let it go. And this is also called the conscious recovery. And this is what's training the mind in meditation, as you're constantly doing these conscious recoveries. And then the mind learns, oh, this is a waste of time. Why should I even generate these thoughts? They're not needed.
Mm.
And the mind is smart. And then the mind gradually is not producing these anymore in that amount. And then your thoughts per minute go down. And if you do this long enough, that's why the, the training aspect, you do it long enough, you get to a point where most of the time there is no thought. You just sit there is no thought. Zero, right? You're just aware, you're in this fully state of being. And occasionally there could be a thought. But again, since you're not paying attention to it, the mind doesn't care anymore. It doesn't mean that you're not basically not functioning anymore, right? There could be sometimes a helpful thought. Maybe there is a thought comes up, oh, in 5 minutes, there's this podcast episode. I should prepare now. So this is now a helpful thought because it got me out of my state of being in a practical execution mode, right? So some thoughts are important, but it's a small fraction of these thoughts, right? So let's say the scientists usually say there is about 50, 70, 80,000 thoughts per day. This is what the science tells us. And that's why when you take a number like 15 thoughts per minute, you multiply it over the day, this is way less than this. So that's why I'm saying the counting is not precise enough. It's probably way higher. You can't even measure that precise. And maybe 1% or less of these thoughts are really important, right? So that they maybe remind you on something or they give you, and then sometimes there is these insights that you get. They're also interesting and helpful. But usually those are not necessarily thoughts. They're just more when you're in a deep state of being, you can tap, and this is called intuition, right? You can tap into wisdom, but these are not thoughts. It's just knowing, right? So that's another dimension that can be leveraged for free. Right?
That's fascinating. I've never considered that a distinction between intuition and thoughts. I'd just considered intuition to be high quality thoughts or something. I hadn't considered that that's something different. Yeah. And knowing, just a sense, I suppose, isn't it? A sense of something, perhaps, as opposed to something that's perhaps purely mental.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the thoughts per minute is a key metric, and as you say, you see people reduce these significantly as they work through your program. Is what might you say would be the next main focus after that for people going through the high performance mind program? Yeah,
that's a good one. I mean, so awareness, as I said, is the underlying pillar of everything. And usually if the mind is too busy, I think the first few weeks is really getting this busy mind a little bit calmer state. And then when the busy mind gets in a little bit calmer state, then you can actually start looking at your mind. And that means you can start to really recognize patterns, behavior. The mind is at the end your personality, your ego, right? Your personality. You can start to observe the ego and be amused, entertained, all the cool stuff, what it's doing, and the things that it believes to be true that are not. And I think the next step then is once you become aware of this, you can start debugging it a little bit. There could be some limiting thoughts, false beliefs, they're no longer helpful. Let's bring them to the surface through awareness. Let's basically review them and let's reprogram them. There's so many different techniques in neuroscience on how you can do that. But awareness first is the first thing to to even recognize that this is happening. There's reactive patterns. They basically get you everyday stuff that basically sometimes the saying like someone is pushing your red buttons, right? These are reactive patterns, whatever that means, right? Someone says something, right? You go into this state of maybe defensive state, you go in an angry state. This is all automated form of behavior that the mind software runs, and it's completely inefficient. And so with more awareness, you can start to debugging it using all kind of different methods. There's so many YouTube videos out there, books, approaches. But the key thing is you have to learn also how you can measure progress on the mind. There's also KPIs. For instance, how many of these patterns have you successfully reprogrammed? You can count them, right? And if you, let's say, reprogram, let's say 2 per week, is this a lot? Maybe not. Maybe you can do 5, right? So think about how much progress you want to make. It's up to you. But reprogramming and upgrading the mind is the next step with more awareness. And in parallel, usually you need to support the body a little bit because the body has suffered all years long with all this garbage going on and excessive energy produced. And then, of course, if this energy is negative, because there is a lot of negativity sometimes there in people, self-doubt, worry, doubt, right? All that stuff. That can lead to fear. Fear is the strongest emotion among these negative ones. And if you're in a state of fear, then yeah, that's not a pleasant state to be there, but you don't have to be in that state. So you can, with awareness, you can become aware of it and you can make changes if you like to do that. So it's not needed, but this is when the mind is not trained and is basically in this autopilot mode. And that causes a lot of stress on your cells, right? Cellular level, there is these 36 billion cells or whatever the exact number is, right, roughly, that are highly intelligent and very sensitive to the environment. So you learn in the science of epigenetics that these cells, basically, there's a cell membrane and there is basically sensors and receptors on this membrane. And they can sense energy. So this is amazing stuff. I mean, this is all rooted in science. There is no magic here. They can sense energy. And if you think negatively, there is negative energy. That energy has a ripple effect through the whole body. And what does the cell do? I mean, the cell is very efficient and it senses there is stress. There is a stressor. And then the cell goes in a lockdown, right? This is what you do. When you get in stress, you lock down. That means nothing goes in, nothing goes out. And this is a problem. Like micronutrients, they need to go into the cells. They can't go in anymore. The other way, toxic metabolites or stuff that gets produced in the cell that needs to go out also can't go out. This is because the cell now is in a lockdown mode because of your thoughts, right? And this is why epigenetics is really powerful in the sense that now you have a rational explanation based on science why stress is actually hurting you. It puts all your cells in this lockdown mode. And if you do that for too long, if you have chronic stress, and most people do, unfortunately, right, then the body is not in a good shape anymore. So this is why then this biohacking is a process, right, kicks in. What can you do? What lifestyle changes can you do to support the body better in these times? Taking more breaks, better nutrition, better sleep, right? And sometimes, most of the times, there is micronutrients that you have to take. Otherwise, you get in states of deficiency, let's say certain minerals, vitamins, and so on. It's complex. And that one is, I would say, yeah, it's a very complex thing. It requires a lot of knowledge. And this is what you learn in the program as well, how to, at least basics, right? Some really basics on how to support the body better. And then when the body is in better shape, all of a sudden you can meditate better. If the body can generate more neurotransmitters or can create them more effectively and can also break them down more effectively, then all of a sudden meditation quality goes up, right? That's the interesting thing. So there's a cycle between awareness, upgraded mind, upgraded body that helps you to actually introduce even more awareness, it's easier then all of a sudden, because you can shift the mind into different states much easier. And this is called mental flexibility. So this have all the good stuff happening when you take care of all three of those things. And this is pretty much the approach. What I'm using is really optimize all three, and this is then a high performance mindset.
Wow, well, that's fascinating. Particularly what you said about cells shutting down, and it makes sense for something I read some time ago about the relationship between childhood trauma and IQ, and this could just be one of the factors, right? That I'm now seeing a potential connection that we know that trauma can negatively impact on IQ, and perhaps part of the reason for that is we get a cell shutdown effect, which prohibits certain micronutrients that might impact brain development. That's just a link I'd not considered before. That's fascinating, and of course, potentially there is some. Go on, sorry.
Yeah, especially if it goes on over longer periods of time. It's not about short moments of stress or anything. That is completely normal. The body is designed for this. But if you're doing this all day long, all week long, right, for many months, this is usually then when you see the stress symptoms creeping up.
Yeah. And it also then makes sense combining it. It's another way to think about why sometimes people trying to get healthy just through improving diet doesn't have the desired effect, right? Because if you're in such a state that your cells can't, embrace that green juice or whatever else you're introducing, you're not going to have the impact.
Exactly. That's the realization, right? That you can do all these fancy good food and micronutrients, but as long as the mind software, let's say, is in a negative state, in a busy state, it pretty much hammers on the body all the time. And it's basically diminishing whatever you're trying to do on the body side. So that's why you need to get the mind to get in a calm state. This you can, however, only do if you increase awareness. Become aware of this, and then you become aware, the mind is busy, and then you use some of the tools through mindfulness, through breathing and that stuff, calm the mind down, then the cells can regenerate, and then all the good stuff that you put in there in terms of micronutrients, nutrition, and so on, then they have an effect.
Yeah. Something I'm curious about, just given the conversation we've had, is that there's this distinction between yin and yang meditation, as I understand it, right? So the yang meditation is you're actively seeking to have positive thoughts, right? To fill the mind with positive thoughts and positive visualizations and affirmations and so on, versus the yin, where you're simply seeking to clear the mind or to let the thoughts go by. What's your view on that in terms of it's been a benefit or impact?
Yeah, it's an interesting aspect. I haven't thought about it that much, to be honest. I think the way I think about things is that thoughts are mostly random. They just pop up, and if they get originated from a yin or from yang, who knows, right? But they get basically originated, and they have not even necessarily judgment to it. They're just there, and they could be. When the interpretation is the interesting thing, when the mind looks at them and interprets them, and then they could be considered positive or negative. This is the judgment piece that happens usually automatically. But it is another thought, right? So there is a thought popping up, and then you start to judge it. And that's when it gets interesting, right? And if you judge too many too negative, then that usually draws in another negative, then you get into this feedback loop. But the process of what's happening or what gets generated is, my opinion, is completely random, right? These thoughts are just popping up. And then if there's a bias, this negative bias in there, which is like just a behavior, then this is what happens then, right? This is when you get into this worry mode. Or if there is more positivity, then you get more into an uplifted state, right? So I think there is, but you choose what you want to do. And if you do it consciously, why would you choose the negative one? Right? That's why usually positive thinking, at the end of the day, if you become aware, you enjoy this. And even if there's something that comes up, you would think, oh, this is actually negative. But even that one, it's just a thought. And why would it be negative? It just is what it is. You accept basically what is, and you leave the judgment out. And that helps a lot.
Right. So we've talked about, so the awareness is key. And then we've talked about this, the next step is to sort of work with the mind, notice the patterns, perhaps have a goal of reprogramming certain patterns, let's say each week. Is there any other vital element, we've missed to the program? I mean, I'm sure there are many, but that just forms the core of it before we close out.
No, I think from the gist that's basically it. I think the problem is more to get started. to get into the process is the hardest. I would say in my experience is the hardest step because of the mind software, the way you're thinking. People have a lot of trouble focusing on themselves first, making themselves a priority. This is my experience. And so they're not getting diligent in terms of putting in effort for themselves. They would do it for their teams. They would do it for all the family, for everyone else, but not for themselves. And you have to make yourself first a priority. You have to do this, you first have to become aware that this is actually an issue. Right? So it's like going back to myself, right? At first I had to become aware. Oops, there is something wrong. It doesn't feel good. You have to first have this opening there, this awareness that tells you, oh, this doesn't make any sense. So in this moment of clarity I had basically when I was in this emergency unit going to the hospital, then there was clarity there. Then there was the opening. And then still with that, it took me many months and years finally to upgrade the mind, because the mind software is distracting. Right? It's basically always keeps you away. The mind doesn't like this stuff, what I'm talking about. Right? The mind likes to do a lot of thought activity, and it's pretty much it's fighting you on that one. Right? Literally, you fight your own ego, right? And that's why it's so hard for people to get started with this. Once they're in there, and they of course go through some of the ups and downs and some of the hoops in the first 1 or 2 months of the program. Then all of a sudden it clicks, not for everyone, right? It's not for everyone, but for most of them, it clicks and then, right? And then you get really sustainable changes, transformative changes in there once you pass a certain threshold. That means concrete with numbers, if LPA has a sufficient level, is high enough, and you keep it up there for long enough. Usually the neuroscience tells us something like 30 to 60 days until some habits basically get reprogrammed. I would say it's probably closer to 60 days. But if you go through those 60 days and you somehow get some of these changes, really stick to them and make sure they get imprinted as autopilot in this case, then you have a good chance of gradually keeping the pace and getting through it.
Yeah, great. Okay, well, it's been absolutely wonderful to speak with you, Reiner. I've had a lot of guests on the show who've come at what we've just talked about very much from a spiritual perspective and from different spiritual traditions. You are definitely the first who's come at this purely from a secular scientific perspective, and it's fascinating to see it laid out in this way. And I thought this is going to appeal to many in the audience. So thanks so much.
No, also thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, no, it's been fantastic. And so for people who want to do the program, learn more, where would you send them?
Yeah, I would say on my website, themindfulleader.net, there's pointers. There's also a YouTube channel. There's the Mindful Leader podcast. So the mindfulleader.net is a good starting point. I'm talking about the program there as well. There is also something like a starter edition. Some people are not ready yet. They want to just get a taste a little bit and see how it resonates with them. So there's different options and ways, and there's lots of articles I wrote about these topics in the past years that you can just go through videos and just see what resonates with you.
Excellent. Okay, and we'll put that link into the description for the show. Well, thank you once again. I could have spoken for hours, but yeah, this has been awesome. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
And enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks.